The ridge burned beneath a dying sun. Pinned against sheer drop, the SEALs clung to rock with the last bullets in their hands. A voice cracked over the net, broken by static. "It's over. We can't hold." No one contradicted it. The mountain was closing its fist. But high above, where thin air turned sound into silence, a shadow cut across the light. No roar, no warning, just the quiet arrival of an F-22 Raptor. You're watching the Story Scape, where impossible orders collide with unforgettable courage. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The ridge was a knife against the sky, jagged stone jutting into thin air, the last high ground before nothing but sheer drop. Snow clung to the shaded side, turning to mud under the heat of gunfire. Bullets chewed the rocks, sparks snapping off like angry insects. 12 men lay along the crest, faces ground into dust, rifles almost dry. Behind them, the abyss stretched unbroken. Ahead, the enemy kept climbing. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reed pressed his shoulder against basalt and loaded his last full magazine with a hand streaked in blood that wasn't all his own. The medic crouched low, dressing a chest wound that hissed with each shallow breath. Someone muttered round counts in a rasping voice, words shaking like prayer beads. The south slope flared with muzzle flashes, the east already joining in, and Reed knew they were seconds from being swallowed whole. He pressed the radio close. Trident 1-1, troops in contact. We're boxed on a ridge, ammo almost black, orange smoke going up. If anyone can hear this, we won't hold. Static, then a whisper that wasn't his. It's over. The words carried no weight of command, only exhaustion, resignation, yet it hung in the air heavier than the mountain itself. For a heartbeat, every man believed it. Miles above, Major Arden Vale sat alone in her cockpit, gauges glowing pale green against her visor. 11 minutes of fuel to bingo. Doctrine screamed retreat. No one would blame her for turning back. But the fragments she caught on her comms slammed harder than any order. She nudged the throttle, eyes cutting across the terrain displayed on her HUD. The ridgeline was suicide, no maneuver space, crosswind shredding stability, rock walls ready to scissor a wing. Training manuals called it unflyable. Her instincts called it necessary. She exhaled, keyed the mic. Trident 1-1, Falcon 2-1, copy your smoke, hold position. Her own voice steadied her pulse. Below, orange smoke hissed skyward, torn sideways by the mountain wind. Reed pressed a casualty lower against the stone as another burst of gunfire raked across the crest. He expected artillery, maybe a drone if luck was kind. Not silence, not the strange stillness that slid into the world like a predator's shadow. The men on the slope faltered, pausing mid-volley as if something had stepped between them and their prey. Reed lifted his head, dust burning his eyes, and saw it. A flash of gray slicing against the sky. No contrail, no roar. A shape that didn't belong in this place, moving with the inevitability of a blade. Arden banked the Raptor along the mountain spine, her HUD painting hostile signatures like sparks against black. RPG teams digging into scree, machine gun nests rattling in hardened nests, a convoy truck half hidden beneath netting. Every second she delayed was another heartbeat stolen from the ridge. Her thumb pressed the weapon selector with ritual precision. She wasn't here to survive. She was here to make sure they did. The Raptor dove, nose biting into thin air, stealth frame cutting a line so precise it seemed drawn with steel thread. Arden's breath slowed, each muscle memorizing the choreography of risk. She squeezed the trigger. On the ridge, Reed felt the mountain buck under his boots. Explosions tore across the south slope in surgical lines. Machine gun nests vanished into sheets of fire. The convoy truck split open, disgorging smoke instead of men. Fighters broke, scrambling for cover, shocked by a strike that gave them no warning. Arden yanked the stick, lungs crushing under the G's, alarms shrieking about altitude, fuel, and structure. She ignored them, rolling high enough to glimpse the crest. Tiny figures pressed into stone, holding on. Reed shouted into the radio, voice jagged with disbelief. Direct hits, south side silenced. For the first time in hours, he heard his men exhale, not in pain, but in stunned relief. But the east slope erupted next, fresh gunfire stitching the ridge. More enemy fighters had been waiting, moving to seal the kill. Reed ducked as stone chipped over his helmet. Arden's eyes cut to the east markers. The slope was tighter, more vertical, no clean approach. Safe choice was climb out, call it a victory, save the jet. Fuel was bleeding away. Protocol begged retreat. She shoved the nose over instead. The chute ahead narrowed to nothing, rock walls closing like jaws, crosswinds ready to tear lift from her wings. Her HUD flashed low fuel, terrain warning, stall risk. The coin taped beside her display caught a glint of light. Arden whispered to it without sound, "Not today," and she pushed the Raptor lower into the run no pilot was meant to survive. The mountain air clawed at the jet, thin and bitter, dragging turbulence across the wings like invisible knives. Arden Vale's hands moved in quick, precise adjustments, trimming a line where the manual said no line could exist. The Raptor wasn't meant for knife fight altitudes. It was a predator designed for sky supremacy. Yet here it was, less than 2,000 feet above jagged stone, threading the edge of a ridgeline war. On the crest, Reed pressed his men flat as gunfire raked over them in sheets. The east slope was alive, dozens of rifles firing down, an RPG streaking into the dusk and hammering into the rock 30 meters from their position. Shards rained down like knives. A wounded SEAL cried out, clutching his leg, but no one dared move to drag him back. They were nailed in place, the cliff at their backs offering nothing but empty air. East slope's thick with them. We can't shift. If you're still up there, Falcon, it's you or nobody. Above, Arden's teeth clenched at the words. She could hear the rattle of small arms over the open mic, could almost smell the cordite as if the mountain carried it up to her cockpit. She checked fuel. 7 minutes to bingo. She checked distance to base. Impossible. Then she looked at the east slope one last time. A canyon of crosswinds, a wall of rock, an approach that left her with one chance. Copy Trident, east slope, danger close. Her gloved hand slid over the throttle, pushing it forward. The Raptor obeyed without complaint, nose dipping, stealth frame slicing through currents that battered lesser jets. She kept the altimeter screaming low, eyes locked on the jagged ridge that rose to meet her. On the ground, Reed risked a glance upward. For an instant, he saw nothing. No contrail, no roar. Then a shadow darted across the cliff, so sudden it looked like the mountain itself had blinked. "Falcon's in!" he whispered to no one, his throat too tight to shout. The enemy fighters didn't see her until it was too late. They had dug themselves into pockets of rock and snow, certain no aircraft could reach them here. But they hadn't planned for a jet flying inside the wind's teeth. Arden's Hugh painted them in red diamonds. She lined the first and fired. Precision fire licked the slope, stitching through bunkers that vanished in a rolling wave of dust. A second burst walked along the cliff, ripping weapons into silence. She yanked hard left, wingtip brushing a downdraft so vicious her canopy rattled like glass in a storm. Reed felt the ridge shudder. A fireball rolled up the east slope, followed by the collapsing echo of rock breaking free. Men screamed, enemy voices, cutting through the mountain air as their cover dissolved beneath the strike. His own men lifted their heads for the first time, disbelief carving lines across their dirt-smeared faces. But the fight wasn't finished. The survivors rallied fast, pushing up from the tree line with renewed fury. Another RPG flared, streaking into the sky toward the jet. Reed watched it twist through the smoke and shouted into the radio, "Incoming! East slope! Missile!" Arden saw the warning flash across her HUD before Reed's call. Her left hand flicked, deploying flares that burned bright against the darkening sky. The missile lunged for the bait, screaming past her canopy before disappearing in a blossom of fire. She didn't flinch. She rolled through the flare smoke, reversed, and came back down. Her lungs burned from holding her breath through maneuvers that pressed her spine into the seat. She had 5 minutes of fuel left, 5 minutes to change the fate of 12 men. She had no reason left to care about her jet making it home. All that mattered was that they did. She lined up another pass, even lower this time, skimming so close that ice whipped from the ridge into vapor trails across her canopy. The Raptor was supposed to be a ghost in the sky, but down here it became something else entirely, a blade swung by willpower alone. Below, Reed dragged the wounded further into the lee of a rock shelf as Arden's second strike ripped into the enemy. Weapons disintegrated, snowfields collapsed into avalanches of fire, and the ridge that had seemed their coffin became a wall of thunder working in their favor. The SEALs could barely hear themselves anymore. The mountain was roaring louder than war. Then the east went silent. Only the crackle of small fires and the groans of shifting stone remained. Reed exhaled, chest heaving, his voice trembling as he spoke into the net. "Falcon, you just opened the ridge. We can move." Arden didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the fuel gauge. 4 minutes left. The west slope was still alive with fighters repositioning to cut off any retreat. If she left now, the SEALs would never make it down the mountain. If she stayed, she might not make it back herself. Her decision took less than a second. She banked toward the west. The Raptor's warning alarms stacked into a single shriek: fuel critical, altitude dangerous, terrain ahead. The jet dove anyway, sliding into the last lethal run, with just minutes of flight between salvation and the silence of a dead engine. The mountain ridge trembled in the aftermath of fire. Black smoke crawled along the stone, wicked sideways by cruel wind. Reed shoved a wounded teammate toward the shallow cover of a jagged boulder. His throat was raw, his weapon almost empty, but his eyes refused to leave the west slope. That's where the new flashes sparked, dozens of them, where fighters had regrouped fast, using the chaos as cover to push higher. "They're not breaking," Reed growled, pressing his cheek to the radio. "Falcon 2-1, west slope still hot. They're cutting us off." Silence answered. For a moment, Reed feared the jet was gone, that she had already turned, fuel drained, leaving them to finish in the way the whisper had predicted. But then, a calm voice slid back through static, steady as stone. "Trident, Falcon, copy. West slope, stay down. You'll hear me before you see me." The words shouldn't have carried comfort, yet every man on that crest felt their spine straighten. Far above, Arden Vale scanned the slope. Her HUD bled red with targets, clusters of men firing heavy machine guns, one team preparing a launch tube, another pushing a truck up a crude path. Her fuel count blinked at her like a threat. 3 minutes to bingo. She could already feel the weight of it, the creeping knowledge that she had no way home if she lingered. But the men below had no way out if she didn't. She pushed the nose down, forcing the Raptor into air so unstable it clawed at her wings. The warning tones shrieked, a chorus of digital protests, but her hands stayed firm. On the ridge, Reed pressed the wounded down into the dirt as the world seemed to hold its breath. No contrail, no roar, just the sudden shadow crossing the rocks. Then the mountain ripped open. The Raptor's strike chewed across the west slope in a perfect, punishing line. Fire and steel tore bunkers apart, detonated the truck, and sent men scattering like ash in a gale. Arden pulled level at the last possible second, the ridgeline scraping beneath her like a knife against glass. Her chest heaved, blood singing in her ears, but her eyes never left the scope. For a few breaths, silence reigned. Reed lifted his head, heart hammering. The west slope was smoke and ruin. His men stared wide-eyed. Disbelief cracked across their faces. For the first time, survival didn't feel like a lie. But movement twitched in the haze. Survivors, determined, desperate, unwilling to surrender the kill. Reed saw them rising from the smoke, shoulder-firing another missile straight at the sky. "Missile! West slope!" he roared. Arden's HUD screamed a fresh warning. She snapped the stick left, banking hard, flare spitting bright fire into the mountain dusk. The missile lunged toward the decoys, veered, and detonated in a thunderclap that shook even the crest below. Shards of steel hissed across her canopy, scoring scars into the paint. Her jet bucked, but she steadied it, rolling back toward the slope. Her fuel counter blinked again. 2 minutes. That was all. 2 minutes until silence, until gravity claimed her as well. She could make it back, or she could make sure they lived, but she could not do both. She chose them. Arden tipped the Raptor into one final descent, sliding along the mountain's shoulder as if the jet were stitched to the stone itself. She lined her pipper on the survivors scrambling for new positions. The trigger squeeze felt like destiny. The slope dissolved in fire, black smoke climbing into the sky like surrender itself. On the ridge, Reed threw his head back, mouth open in a laugh that was more disbelief than joy. "Falcon, you broke them! You broke the whole damn ridge!"
His men were already moving, dragging the wounded, reloading what little remained, preparing to descend before more fighters came. For the first time, they could move. Arden, however, wasn't moving anywhere safe. Her fuel counter bled into red. 1 minute. Her return vector showed nothing but impossibility. She had spent her jet for them. The ridge was secure, but her cockpit was filled with alarms, a cockpit slowly dimming under the truth of gravity. Reed's voice cracked through the radio. "Falcon, say again your status. Falcon, do you copy?" But Arden Vale said nothing. The Raptor dipped, nose heavy, as if the mountain itself was pulling her back down into the fight she had just ended. The ridge was fire behind them and darkness ahead. Reed shoved his men into motion, boots crunching over broken stone, dragging the wounded as fast as human bodies could move after hours of punishment. They descended off the crest in a staggered line, rifles raised more out of habit than hope. For the first time, the enemy fire had gone quiet, smothered by the storm that had fallen from the sky. But Reed's eyes never left the heavens. "Falcon, Trident 1-1, he rasped into the net. "Your run saved the ridge. Status, say again." Only static. He knew what that meant. The jet had stayed too long. Above,
Arden Vale fought her cockpit as if wrestling the laws of physics themselves. The gauges bled red. Fuel was gone. The Raptor was gliding now, falling more than flying. Every maneuver stole seconds she didn't have. Her breath came in sharp bursts, helmet pressing like a weight against her skull. The ridge had demanded a price, and she had paid it with everything but her heartbeat. She flicked a glance at the photo taped beside her HUD, a faded shot of her training class, half of them gone now. Beneath it, the coin from her crew chief, still shining faintly in the dim glow. "Not today," she whispered, though the words shook this time. The mountain wind struck the jet with fists of turbulence, dragging her down into air so thin it clawed at every surface. She leveled, trimmed, begged the glide to hold. Ahead stretched nothing but shadowed ridges and snowbound peaks. No flat land, no runway, nothing. On the ground, Reed and his men reached the tree line, lungs heaving, dragging their casualties under branches for the brief cover it gave. One SEAL dropped to his knees, rifle clattering from his hands. Another slammed a palm against Reed's shoulder, eyes wide. The sky above them flashed once more. The Raptor, gliding lower, no afterburner, no sound but the whisper of wind over its stealth frame. It was dying. "Falcon, you're out of fuel, aren't you? You stayed too long." A crackle answered him, faint, thin, almost drowned in static. "Trident, negative safe fuel. You move. Get off that ridge. Don't wait." Reed clenched his jaw. "We're not leaving you."
"Not your choice," Arden replied. Her voice clipped, cold, professional, yet carrying something else beneath it. Something final. The SEALs had been ready to die for their ridge. Now she was ready to die for them. Her mind worked in ruthless surgical flashes. She couldn't climb out. She couldn't reach base, but she might still use gravity itself as a weapon. The west ridgeline still smoked, but movement stirred in the haze, survivors, regrouping, pushing reinforcements up. If she went down, she'd take them with her. She lined the jet up, HUD trembling, alarms stacking into a choir of doom. The Raptor dipped lower, skimming so close her canopy almost kissed stone. Below, enemy fighters shouted, their rifles barking at a phantom they couldn't stop. Reed saw it happening, his throat locked. "She's not pulling out." Arden's hand hovered on the stick. Her training screamed eject. Protocol said save yourself. But she had already broken every line in the book. Why stop now? The ground loomed, jagged teeth of rock tearing up at her. She squeezed her eyes once, reopened them, and steadied her breath. If this was the end, she would make it count. And then, like a ghost choosing mercy, the HUD blinked something she hadn't expected. A strip of flattened snow, barely a shelf along the mountain's shoulder, hidden in shadow. Not a runway, not even safe, but it was land. It was a chance. She rolled hard, banking the Raptor toward it. Metal groaned, air screamed, the jet shuddered as if deciding whether to hold together or tear apart. Reed watched from the tree line as the F-22 skimmed the ridge, nose pitching down toward that impossible shelf. Fire still burned along the slope. The jet vanished into smoke, and no one knew if Arden Vale had just found salvation or chosen to die with her jet. Snow and smoke blurred together on the mountain's shoulder, a shifting mirage where survival looked no different from death. The Raptor sliced through the haze, its wings trembling against turbulent crosswinds that hammered it from both sides. Arden Vale gritted her teeth, every muscle in her arm straining against the stick as the jet wavered toward the narrow shelf of flattened snow she'd glimpsed seconds earlier. It wasn't a landing strip.
It was barely wide enough to hold the shadow of her jet, but it was all she had. The cockpit screamed warnings: hydraulic stress, fuel dry, altitude bleed, each one stacked in her ears like verdicts. She ignored them, focused instead on the single line ahead, a white scar along the slope, hidden in darkness, now rushing upward as gravity pulled harder. On the ground, Reed and his men dragged themselves into cover at the base of the trees, heads craned upward. Through breaks in the smoke, they caught glimpses of the Raptor as it skimmed across the ridge like an arrow loosed from heaven. None of them had seen a jet flown this low, this desperate. Reed knew the truth. She wasn't flying for herself anymore. The SEALs had been prepared to die for that ridge. Now they were watching someone else stake everything for them. "Falcon, you don't have room," Reed muttered into the net. "Pull up, you'll never." Her voice cut him off, calm and final. "Stay alive, Trident. That's the order." The Raptor dropped gear in a scream of hydraulics. The wheels groaned, fighting to lock against freezing air. Arden lined her nose, jaw tight, eyes burning as the shelf blurred closer. She felt the mountain's wind twist beneath her wings, shoving her sideways. One correction, then another. She had inches of margin left. She touched down. Metal shrieked across ice and rock, sparks spraying like stars dragged down to earth. The fuselage skidded, bucked, slammed against uneven ground. Arden's helmet cracked against her seat as her harness bit into her shoulders. Snow exploded in plumes around the jet, blinding her view. For a heartbeat, she thought she had bought her grave after all. Then, silence. The Raptor sat crippled, but whole on the narrow shelf, steam hissing from its vents, wings tilted like a wounded bird refusing to die. Arden's chest rose and fell in ragged bursts. She ripped her oxygen mask away and let the cold air bite her lungs. Against every law of probability, she was alive. Below, Reed and his men erupted into shouts. "She put it down! She actually put it down!" The disbelief was louder than joy, the kind of cry men make when the impossible breaks itself in front of their eyes. But the fight wasn't finished. The west slope still smoked with enemy fire, and through the haze, figures began to reappear. Fighters regrouping, moving to climb again. Reed cursed under his breath. "They're not done. They'll be coming for her now." Arden sat in her cockpit, hands trembling against the throttle. The Raptor was silent, a predator with its claws broken. She had no lift, no fuel, no weapons left. All she had was her sidearm strapped to her leg and the fading thrum of a jet that had already given more than anyone could ask. She unstrapped, pulled the canopy release, and let the frigid mountain air pour inside. Snow whipped at her face as she climbed out onto the shelf, boots sinking into ice. She stood there for a moment, one figure against the immensity of stone and sky, the ruined jet behind her glowing faintly in the smoke. She had arrived as a ghost from the sky. Now she would have to fight as a soldier on the ground.
From below, Reed's voice crackled across the net. "Falcon, hold your position. We're moving to you. We'll get you off that slope." Arden scanned the ridge. She could already see shapes emerging through the haze, enemy fighters clawing their way higher, rifles glinting in the fading light. Her hand dropped to the sidearm. One magazine, 15 rounds, enough for a promise, not for a war. "Negative, Trident," she replied. "You focus on your wounded. I'll hold the shelf." Reed slammed his fist against the rock. "We don't leave our own," she said. "You're not. I'm giving you time. Move." And then the mountain answered with fire. Tracer rounds whipped through the haze, ricocheting off stone near the crippled jet. Arden crouched, sidearm raised, eyes narrowed against the sting of snow and smoke. Her pulse slowed, every sense sharpening to a hunter's edge. She was no longer the pilot.
She was simply the last barrier between the ridge and the men below. The first enemy fighter pulled through the smoke, rifle leveled, a shout tearing from his throat. Arden Vale exhaled, sighted, and squeezed, her lone pistol shot echoing across the mountain as the ridge lit up for one last battle. Snow hissed as rounds tore across the mountain shelf, sparks flashing off the Raptor's broken frame. Arden Vale crouched low beside the crippled jet, pistol steady in her hand. The first fighter burst through the haze and dropped before his rifle barked. Another followed. Arden exhaled, sighted, fired, one shot, one fall. Her pistol cracked again and again, each round measured, each casing clinking against ice. When the mag emptied, she reloaded with calm precision. She had been a pilot moments ago. Now she was simply a soldier holding the last line. Below, Reed drove his men through the tree line, dragging the wounded downhill. But all of them kept looking back, at the lone figure on the shelf, standing guard beside a jet that could no longer fly. "She's buying us time," Reed rasped. "Don't waste it." The slope lit again with enemy fire. Arden ducked, shards of rock pelting her helmet. 15 rounds were all she had. Enough to delay, not to win. The radio crackled. "Falcon, hold, we're coming up." "Negative," she answered. "Get your people out, that's an order." "You won't last," Reed barked. Her reply was flat steel. "That's not the point." The SEALs had been ready to die for their ridge. Now she was ready to die for them. Figures emerged through smoke, rifles flashing. Arden rose, fired 3 times. 2 fell. The third collapsed into drifting snow. Her last magazine slammed home. She crouched low again, eyes fixed, pulse steady. And then the mountain changed its voice. Not rifles, not jets, rotors.
Reed's head snapped up. Over the ridge, 2 helicopters appeared, rotors thundering, searchlights cutting the dusk. The fighters froze. Arden stood tall on the shelf, pistol raised, the ruined Raptor glowing faintly behind her. Her final shots cracked out as the helicopters unleashed their door guns, shredding what remained of the assault. The SEALs dropped into cover, laughter and disbelief spilling together. "She held it," one whispered. Reed shook his head. "No, she owned it." A winch line swung down. Arden holstered her empty sidearm, clipped on, and looked back at the jet one last time. The Raptor sat scarred but proud, steam curling from its frame like breath. It had carried her further than survival and stayed behind as her monument. She lifted into the night, boots dangling above the frozen ridge, the SEALs below watching with awe usually reserved for myth. Hours later, in a dim hangar, Colonel Whitfield pressed a hand to her shoulder. "Colonel Vale, you turned a tomb into your legend." Arden only unclipped the tarnished coin from her harness and set it in the colonel's palm. "Keep it," she said softly. "I already spent it." High above the Valley of Silence, the crippled F-22 still perched on the ridge, steam rising into starlight. Below, the mountain was quiet at last, and above it, the night sky stretched endless and clean, bearing witness to the pilot who had carved her name in silence.